Hello everyone and welcome. Thank you for tuning in today for this presentation about NHDES's Local Source Water Protection Grant Program. I am Melissa Macheris, the Program Manager for the Local Source Water Protection Grant Program. And today my presentation will provide an overview of the grant program and also give some helpful guidance and tips for creating a high-scoring application. About half of the people living in New Hampshire get their household drinking water from public water systems regulated under state and federal Safe Drinking Water Acts. Sources for public water systems can include lakes, rivers, and wells. This grant program provides assistance to implement protection of local drinking water sources, our aquifers, lakes, and rivers used by communities as sources of drinking water. The grant program was initiated in 1997. And the funding source for this program comes from the Federal Drinking Water State Revolving Fund that is administered by the Drinking Water and Groundwater Bureau at NHDES. Many of these projects generally involve planning, implementation, and public outreach and education. The funding limit for most grant projects is $25,000, but increases to $30,000 for projects that address climate change challenges. NHDES is encouraging communities to be more involved with climate change initiatives by incorporating actions that will increase their resiliency against events like flooding, erosion, sedimentation, and stresses to stormwater infrastructure. There is some information at the end of the application packet that will help you to better understand what we are looking for in terms of implementation of climate change initiatives within a project. There are over 700 community water systems in New Hampshire and over 2,300 public water supply sources, including groundwater and surface water sources. Approximately 36 public water systems use about 55 surface water sources, including New Hampshire's major cities like Concord, Salem, Manchester, and more. In general, source protection is largely voluntary and implemented at the local level. This is why it's important to inform the public about the ways they can help to protect sources of drinking water through their daily actions, and why it is important for local organizations to be involved in the protection of drinking water sources in their communities. So why apply to this grant program? Funding from the Local Source Water Protection Grant Program can help you to plan and prepare for difficult future circumstances with regards to drinking water sources. It can help cities and towns prepare for community growth, which can put stress on drinking water sources. It can help to get the project you've been thinking about starting finally moving forward, and it can help to mitigate impacts to source waters and save money in the long term. And overall, the goal is to protect New Hampshire's valuable drinking water sources. So who can apply for these grants? Grants can be awarded to water suppliers, regional planning commissions, county conservation districts, watershed associations, municipalities, nonprofit organizations, state agencies, and educational institutions. Collaboration between groups also occurs sometimes. For example, in 2021, the Stratford Regional Planning Commission worked with the towns of Milton and Rollinsford to audit and update their stormwater management programs and create public education materials for residents and business owners in those towns. Another example, Granite State Rural Water Association, which is a nonprofit organization, worked with several partners in New Hampshire and Maine to host a full-scale emergency spill response exercise on the Salmon Falls River. Some main important components to the program's eligibility are: the award cannot exceed $25,000 for most projects, or $30,000 for projects that address climate change issues. The project must address an active or planned source of drinking water for a public water system, and must address some component of the Source Water Protection Program, which I will go over on the next slide. I'd also like to mention that the same applicant can apply for 2 distinct projects in 1 year. In the 2020, 2021, and 2023 grant rounds, we had 1 grantee that applied for and had 2 projects approved, so that is not uncommon. There are 5 different types of source protection project categories that are potentially eligible for grant funding. I will briefly go through each element and give an overview of their intent or purpose, and then later in this presentation I will talk about some examples of past projects based on these elements. The first is delineation, then assessment, planning, implementation, and security. First, I will talk about delineation projects. Source water protection areas in New Hampshire include wellhead protection areas and hydrologic areas of concern, which are watershed areas around surface water intakes. These are approved and maintained by NHDES. Grant projects may involve improving a current delineation, such as refining a watershed area around a surface water intake or delineating the wellhead protection area around a future source. Delineations for new public water system wells are completed by hydrogeologists and require a lot of site-specific hydrologic information about the flow of underground water and surface-to-ground interactions to establish the area within which water flows to the well. This work is highly technical and expensive and would most likely require a significant match from other sources. Please note that projects seeking funding for activities required under NHDES rules and regulations are not eligible. For example, delineating the wellhead protection area of a new well as required under the NHDES new well siting rules would not be eligible for funding. The second category of protection projects are referred to as assessment projects. An assessment project can include inventory, evaluation, or both. Inventory projects may involve improving upon existing inventories, such as inventory of land uses, evaluating potential contaminant sources, establishing a water quality monitoring program, or inventorying relevant local protection ordinances. Inventory projects are often one aspect of a larger planning project. Evaluation projects may involve evaluating existing and potential threats to water quality or evaluating existing protection measures. Source water assessments are studies that generate reports or information about potential contaminant sources and the potential impact by these sources on a drinking water system. Public water systems and source water protection partners can use the assessment data to develop an action plan and implement measures to protect and/or enhance source water protection, such as public education, watershed conservation, adoption of best management practices, or land use restrictions. These types of assessments can also guide water supply planning efforts and coordination of emergency responses. The third group of projects are referred to as planning projects. Planning projects can use grant funding to identify appropriate protection measures that can include educational programs, land use regulations, land acquisition planning, source water protection planning, or watershed management planning. Planning can follow from local or state source water assessments that identify the leading threats to drinking water in your community or the region. New in 2023, we are requiring that any new protection or management plans, like a watershed plan, incorporate actions that increase resiliency against challenges resulting from climate change-induced events, such as flooding, erosion, or stresses to stormwater infrastructure, etc. A good planning project application will explain how the project will support implementation of source water protection measures and demonstrates a high likelihood of being achieved. Next, we have implementation projects. Implementation projects are just as they sound. They implement or carry out protection and security measures in source water protection areas. These types of projects can include land conservation, land transaction costs for source water protection lands, source sustainability, such as preserving groundwater recharge, water conservation, education and outreach, MS4 required permit activities, stormwater BMPs, and also the activities I previously mentioned under the planning category as well. The fifth and final element is security. Security projects generally involve the installation of security equipment to further enhance or upgrade security measures directly around the drinking water source. This can include items such as fencing, access gates, security systems, signs, cameras, locks, and lights. Security cameras and fencing must be directly protecting the source of drinking water. This grant will not fund cameras or fencing for infrastructure that is not directly surrounding the well or intake. For example, cameras or fencing to protect a pump house or water tank are not eligible for funding through this grant. An environmental review is required for any source water protection project that requires site construction, such as security fence or gate installation. Funding recipients for these types of projects will be required to submit an environmental review form to NHDES, and this review process can take anywhere from 6 weeks to a couple months. And more information will be sent to applicants if their grant application is determined to be recommended for funding. Finally, this grant does not fund cybersecurity projects. NHDES offers a separate cybersecurity grant program, and more information about that program can be found on the NHDES website. So what does a successful project look like? A successful project will have a clear and defined purpose and scope of work. What is your goal, and how will it result in improved source protection? Provide as many details as possible. Be specific in terms of timelines, site plans, and who, what, when, where, etc. Include as much additional information to better understand who is involved and the reason for the project. In the project narrative section of the application, you should include information about what specific threats the project will address. We want to know what the current threat to the water source is and how the project will help resolve those issues. Your project should lead to implementation, carrying out the protection measures described in the application. It is important to identify and involve local stakeholders to support your project. This can be done through letters of support, and the more support you have, the better your application will score. Once a project is completed, there must be tangible deliverables submitted to DES for review and approval. Once applications are received, the review team will get together and evaluate and rank the applications. The scoring sheet that is used in this evaluation is included in the application packet, so you can review the ranking categories and the number of points associated with each category. Utilizing the scoring sheet when filling out your application can help as a guide for creating a better scoring application. Take note of the criteria at the bottom of the sheet that subtract points as well as those that add points. And as I've previously mentioned, be detailed in your application. The more that is understood about the proposed project, the better. And some things to avoid in your application. You don't want your project narrative to be too general or for it to be unclear in describing how it will protect the source. Don't submit an application where the actions described do not address a current or future risk to drinking water resources. Don't design your project around outcomes or results that are not going to be feasible. A good application will show a high likelihood of implementation, and the outcomes will be clearly defined. If you are submitting any maps or site sketches, make sure they are clear and readable. It will not help your application if you submit a map or a sketch that we are unable to interpret. And finally, you don't want to submit an application that showcases little to no support from key stakeholders. Plan to include at least a few letters of support from the stakeholders in your project, whether that be the municipality, water systems, local planning board, or others. On the next two slides, I will show the ranking sheets for source security projects and source protection projects and highlight some important and often overlooked categories. This is the scoring sheet for security projects. There are many criteria here, and we need to be able to find information about each of them in your application and project description. So again, the more detail you can provide, the better. I'm just going to highlight some of the categories that can add or subtract a large number of points. First, how much non-federal match will be provided. This is broken down into 4 sections: 50% or greater, 25 to 49%, 1 to 24%, or no match. And those correspond with the point values listed on the right. The more match you can provide, the more points you can receive for this category, up to 15 points. What is the overall quality of the application? We are looking for a complete, clear, and well-reasoned project description, timeline, description of tasks, and deliverables. This category can earn you up to 18 points for being clear and detailed. At the bottom, there are a few categories that can subtract points. One that often gets overlooked and costs applicants a lot of points is describing provisions for long-term maintenance. If your project involves installation of fencing or camera equipment, etc., please don't forget to include information about how you plan to maintain them over time. The more detailed you are, the less points you will lose on this category. The proposed project should include developing a schedule for maintenance and a commitment of resources for following through with this maintenance. To ensure no points are deducted in this category, the applicant should include a written commitment from the municipality, property owner, or other entity, as well as a schedule for future maintenance. This is an important category which can cost you up to 10 points if you omit and is often forgotten by applicants. Moving on to the criteria for source protection projects. Again, I want to highlight the match category here. It's the same as the match category for security projects and can earn you up to 15 points. Does the project demonstrate a high likelihood of implementation? Again, this is where the details come in. We are looking to see a clear outline of your plans and steps that will lead to the implementation of the project described in your application. If your project demonstrates a high likelihood of implementation, you can receive up to 20 points on the scoring sheet. Again, you can receive up to 18 points if the overall quality of the application is clear and shows an understanding of source water protection concepts and methods. And finally, bringing your attention to the categories at the bottom of the scoring sheet that can subtract points from your application. If your project involves equipment or BMPs, have you outlined provisions for long-term maintenance? This category can subtract 10 points from your application, so if your project includes any of these features, please remember to outline your plans for long-term maintenance. It is a category that is often overlooked. Now for some important dates. Funding for these grants occurs every year. The submittal deadline for this round is November 1st, 2023. Between November and December, the review team will score and rank applications, and selected applicants will be notified in January of 2024. The completed signed grant documents with original signatures must be returned to NHDES by April 1st, 2024. If the documents aren't received by that date, the project will be reviewed to determine if there is sufficient time to gain approvals in the current grant round, and if it is determined that there is not enough time, applicants will be asked to reapply in the next grant round. Grant agreements typically receive Governor and Council approval during April or May, but must be approved by June 30th, 2024 at the very latest. And all grant projects have a one-year completion timeline, with the completion date of May 31st the following year, 2025. This link or QR code will take you to where you can find and download the application. Or if you go to the NHDES website and search Source Water Protection, you will find it on the Source Water Protection Program page. Now I will highlight some examples of successful past grant projects. The first is an example assessment project. In 2019, Granite State Rural Water Association produced a land use assessment for the Whitewater watershed for Claremont's municipal water supply. The report outlined the percentage of each land use type, ownership patterns, timber management, and inventoried potential contamination sources that included bacteria from wildlife such as geese, recreational and forestry activities, and the recommended development of a land conservation plan to acquire key lands around the 3 reservoirs used as primary sources of drinking water by the city. The plan also reviewed master plans and zoning protections that now apply in Cornish, Croydon, and Claremont, and laid out a series of recommendations that included land conservation, aquatic buffers, erosion controls, and watershed stewardship. Next is an example planning project. New Hampshire has been in drought for 5 of the last 6 years. To reduce lawn watering during drought, Stratford Regional Planning Commission developed a municipal code for Rochester to limit lawn watering during state-declared drought. Stratford Regional Planning Commission also developed guidance for Dover concerning how their planning board could increase groundwater infiltration and improve stormwater treatment by increasing green infrastructure in large parking areas that would otherwise generate significant stormwater runoff. We are currently working on creating some guidance for communities about adopting a lawn watering restriction bylaw into their town's ordinances. So if you're interested in adopting these restrictions into your own town's ordinances, please reach out to me and I would be happy to share those resources with you. Federal MS4 stormwater permits require participating municipalities to conduct yearly outreach, address illicit discharges, conduct wet weather monitoring of stormwater discharges, and assess existing local regulations, such as zoning and construction codes, to make sure green infrastructure practices are allowable. To help communities implement federal MS4 permit requirements, the Local Source Water Protection Grant Program funded the Stratford Regional Planning Commission to make major amendments for the towns of Milton and Rollinsford to municipal site plan and subdivision regulations that required low-impact development design alternatives to be considered, native plantings, improved salt management, and installation of stormwater treatments proven to remove contaminants, as demonstrated by UNH's Stormwater Center and included in NHDES's Stormwater Manual. The project included the development of several public outreach tools, one addressing septic systems that can contaminate nearby wells with harmful bacteria like E. coli, or discharge excessive phosphorus to a surface water, accelerating vegetation and cyanobacteria growth that can affect surface water used by a public water system. In 2013, the Lakes Region Planning Commission worked with the City of Laconia to design and install a vegetated bioretention basin that would reduce stormwater runoff into Paugus Bay. Stormwater, which is water from rain or melting snow that does not soak into the ground, can cause pollution in water bodies as it carries pollutants from roads such as chemicals or sediments into the body of water. Unlike pollution from industry or sewage treatment facilities, stormwater pollution is caused by the daily activities of people everywhere. Vegetated bioretention basins are one example of a best management practice that can be installed to reduce stormwater runoff into bodies of water. The bioretention basin will collect stormwater and filter it through a mixture of soil, sand, and gravel, which will help to remove pollutants and reduce the volume of stormwater entering the lake. This is a great example of an implementation project that will protect a source of drinking water from stormwater pollution. NHDES hopes to fund more projects like this one to install BMPs that will reduce stormwater pollution in drinking water sources. Protecting high-priority lands around a well or surface water intake is an important source water protection tool, and today we have more funding available than at any time in the recent past. While the state's Drinking Water and Groundwater Trust Fund provides $2 million annually to conserve lands in wellhead protection areas and in water supply watersheds, transactional costs that include land surveys and appraisals are often necessary in advance of obtaining larger land conservation grants. In this example, the local Source Water Protection Grant Program provided $25,000 to defray land conservation transactional costs for land that surrounds the Bellamy Reservoir, which is the source of drinking water for the city of Portsmouth. These grant funds will help to pay for costs that are necessary in advance of purchasing the conservation easement, such as the land survey, hazardous waste assessment, appraisal, closing costs, stewardship fund, attorney fees, title insurance, and more. Protection of this property from development and its collaborative stewardship by the Southeast Land Trust and the City of Portsmouth will help mitigate the existing threats and reduce potential for future threats to the city's public water resources. And that concludes this presentation. I just want to remind you that applications are due November 1st, so if you have a project in mind, please feel free to reach out to me to discuss. We are happy to host some pre-application meetings to discuss project ideas or provide assistance with the application itself. My contact information is listed right here on the screen, so please let me know how I can help you, and I look forward to hearing from you about your project ideas.